So welcome. I'm going to call the meeting to order. It is 7 o'clock, and this is a special meeting of the Parks and Recreation Commission. And at tonight's meeting, we are going to be accepting comments on the Albany Beach Renovation Project. And we're going to begin tonight with a short presentation from Jeff Bond.
Good evening, Commissioners. Thank you for the opportunity to give you a brief introduction to the Albany Beach Restoration and Public Access Project, and in particular the draft Supplemental Environmental Impact Report, which has been prepared by consultants retained by the East Bay Regional Park District and is in its public comment period right now through February 11th. So for the next couple of minutes, I want to just very briefly describe the project to you and the process that the Park District is going through, and then I'd be happy to answer any questions. I'm going to keep it pretty quick, so I'm sure you'll have lots of questions, and I'll do my best to answer those. And then, of course, members of the public will have an opportunity to address the commission and discuss their thoughts on the document. The beach project is something that's been in the planning stages for a number of years. It's being led by the East Bay Regional Park District. It's on land that is owned or managed by the Park District today. There are three primary elements to the project, and summarized on the screen and in the document. The first part of the project, and one that we've been told to expect to start work this summer, is to repair the shoreline along the neck, the southern edge of the shoreline along the neck, kind of that road that most people would take if you're walking out towards the bulb. In a moment, I have a graphic to show you the work that they'll be doing there. The second element is to, around the beach area, to redo that beach area and create some dunes and wetlands, also adding a restroom, a parking area, and a bay trail through that area. And then the third phase is to construct a bay trail route, a formal bay trail route. There's an informal one there today that everybody uses just riding to the parking lot, but to create a formal route for the bay trail through the Golden Gate Fields property. As I mentioned, the first phase is expected to start in 2015. The other phases don't have start dates yet. And this is just to kind of help people get oriented. This is the neck area that I mentioned, the first phase that we'll expect to see work. The second phase is the beach area there, and then the third phase is to connect for bicyclists and pedestrians, basically from the end of Buchanan up here, where that turnaround is in the sculpture, connected all the way down, and it's a little bit out of this view, but right down to Gilman, to the rest of the Bay Trail going south. There are lots of different graphics I could show you. I'm just going to kind of pick one to illustrate each of the first two phases, just to give you a quick sense of what's going on. This is a cross-section of the shoreline along the neck, so this would be as if you're standing, say, near the bulb and looking back towards the mainland. Today, there is the road, of course, is there, and then there's some of the fill material, the old concrete and so forth. Basically, this area would be reconstructed. If you go out there and you notice carefully, there's lots of erosion going on. This would be reconstructed, and some new plantings put in along, and in the water would be an oyster shell reef that would be for habitat. And then the trail itself would be in the same location, but would be narrowed a little bit. And I think their idea is to kind of create a little bit of a meander to it, to make it a little bit more of a trail rather than what it feels like today, which is a pretty wide kind of service road. The beach project, the beach portion of the project is a bit more elaborate of a project. It would be enhancing what they're characterizing as a beach enhancement, a wetlands area here, and for motor vehicles, where we now have a turnaround at the end of Buchanan, there would be a road that would go down to a small parking area, to a new turnaround. There would also be restrooms right there. And this green dash line, mouse here. Okay, there's it. This green dash line would be the Bay Trail connection running north and south. The phase that we're at right now with the project, or the district is at, I should say, with the project, is required by the California Environmental Quality Act. It goes by the acronym CEQA. And basically, CEQA requires government agencies, such as the district and the city, to study potential environmental impacts of proposed projects. Because this is a project that's being led by the district, they are, even though it's in our jurisdiction, they are the government agency that's primarily responsible for the project. And they are responsible for preparing this document. They will take the comments, and like most agencies, like we do, generally, they have a consultant. They've hired a consultant to prepare this document. Any comments that are received in any form go back to the consultant. The consultant's required to evaluate those comments. Sometimes they get an elaborate response. Other times it's just something that they acknowledge that they've received the information. We're what's called a responsible agency, which means that we have to make sure we don't do anything in the course of our support of the project, in which, in our case, as a city, our role is very minor. We would issue them some routine permits to let them use city streets, as example, for coming and going for construction. Not a big deal. We do that probably with almost every construction project. It's called an encroachment permit. But nonetheless, that's a permit that we're associated with. And so we're called what's referred to under CEQA as a responsible agency. Now, the planning for this project began years ago. As I mentioned, an environmental impact report was prepared and completed for all three phases of this project in 2012. There was a legal challenge to that environmental impact report, and the Superior Court ruled that an additional analysis of the dog use and the potential impacts of the dog use was required for particularly the beach phase of the project. So that's what's out there today. It's a relatively brief environmental impact report. If for a normal project, they can run hundreds or thousands of pages, so in a sense, it's a relief to have something that's only 45. By our standards, it's really short and succinct. And so the district is responding to the court's requirements to reanalyze the impacts of dogs. There's a lot of interesting information in the report. They did some surveys of how the waterfront's being used. I just pulled this one table out because I thought it would be interesting to highlight for you. They did some observations about the number of users out at the different areas of the waterfront, and to just kind of quickly guide you through this table, this column with dogs, the number of people with dogs, the neck, the beach, and the Bay Trail areas are highlighted. Then there's, of that 247 people, the number of dogs that are on leash and off leash. But the math doesn't add up, and I think that's because some people have more than one dog, or maybe one dog on leash and one dog off, I presume. Then the this column, the number of people who didn't have any dogs, so that gets you to the total number of visitors, and then the total number of dogs. So as you can see, there's quite a few off-leash dogs. A lot of people go out with their dogs, and a lot of them are off-leash. The consultants analyzed those numbers of existing dogs and projected how the project might increase those. And to summarize very quickly the conclusions of the analysis, they looked at 4 areas. 2 of them they thought there might be some potential significant impacts. Those are on the biological resources and geology and soils sections of the review. They also looked at hydrology and water quality and land use and planning, and concluded that there are not expected to be significant impacts. So, coming to wrap this up, for the to give you an example of the primary mitigation measure that's identified in the analysis, and I just picked the first one to highlight for you, but they're all essentially the same. So they said potential impact is increased park visitors, could lead to trampling and other degradation of enhanced dune mat vegetation and wetlands. There were some others like this. And the recommended mitigation measure is fencing around the dunes and wetland area to prevent the dogs from getting in there and doing the damage. So there are a series of impacts. They all kind of come to the same conclusion, which is to fence off the sensitive areas. The point of having this document out in the public is for the members of the public to look this over, either conclude that they agree with it or disagree with it. They may disagree with the analysis. They can disagree or agree with the mitigation measures and whether those are adequate or not. As I mentioned, the deadline is February 11th, and then the district's consultants will assemble all those, respond to them in writing, present it to the board of directors of the district, and then I would presume sometime later this spring, early summer, they would make a decision on accepting the environmental impact report. That concludes my presentation. Thank you for hanging in there. I know it kind of gets dry pretty quickly when you talk about the California Environmental Quality Act, but I wanted to give you a quick summary, and I'm happy to answer any questions now or later on.
Thank you. So what we'll do now is the commissioners will have the opportunity to ask Mr. Bond clarifying questions. So does anybody have any questions?
No. Thank you, though, for taking the time to present that to us. It's very helpful.
You're welcome.
So I had a question. I had two questions. One is about the fencing. Did they provide any details on what the fencing would look like to keep the dogs from jumping over it or digging underneath it?
I don't remember a graphic description of that. That would be the kind of, that's a good observation that we could, we provide to the district, that we'd like to see what that is before they approve the EIR.
Okay. And then the second question was about the enforcement of the on-leash, off-leash. When I was reading it, if I understood correctly, East Bay Regional Parks doesn't allow dogs off-leash, but they also don't have the manpower to enforce that. And so I was wondering if Albany had any responsibility for enforcing that once the park takes over the land?
I don't believe the Albany Police Department has the ability to write citations under the enforcing East Bay Park District rules. So I think that would have to be a district person who would do that.
Okay. I just didn't know if it was added responsibility for the city, so.
No, I don't believe that would be. Our police department would always, we are anticipating being first responders if there is a need for law enforcement services right away, but and then they've always done that and they will continue to do that. But in terms of kind of routine enforcement, I don't think that our officers would be able to do that on district property.
Okay.
I did have one question. I just want to confirm that there aren't any plans for a designated dog, off-leash area, like fence the dogs rather than fence all the amenities.
Yeah, that's not
Okay.
going to
Just wanted to confirm that.
Yeah.
Well, I guess I have one more question. And so the Bay Trail, as it connects to Gilman, is it going to use the existing road that you would take if you were going up over Golden Gate Fields, or is it going to go like adjacent to the water?
It's going to go adjacent to the water. It's a pretty substantial project. They kind of cut into the edge of the shoreline so that there is a proper path that keeps you out of the parking lot and out of the roadways back there.
Oh, okay. Anything else come up on that side? No? Okay, well then, so the next thing we're going to do is we'll take comments from the public. And so you'll be given approximately 3 minutes to come to the podium, state your name, where you live, and you can tell us your comments. We won't be responding to your comments, but feel free to speak. You can form a line over there, maybe 3 people deep.
Would you like me to run the clock for this, or?
I
If necessary.
think, why don't we try it without first? I mean, you have a small crowd, so just try to keep to your 3 minutes. Does anybody want to speak? Please approach, yeah.
Hi, my name is Ellen Barth. I wanted to speak to the issue of that I don't understand that there is no provision for dogs being required to be on leash, in the sense that the only mitigation is to put fencing up. I visited with young children in the 60s, even when it was still a dump. After 4 or 5 years of trying to play on the beach and in the water with young children, I just gave up because, and I talked to the park district often. Since then, I have just put the issue aside. I moved on with things. It's very distressful to me to read the park initial EIR and to find that their solution to the dogs off leash was to extend the area so that the dog to acreage square footage would be about the same, and the reasoning of it surpasses belief to my way of thinking. I think there is also a rule of the state park that dogs must be on leash on beaches, that the city of Albany doesn't have any influence on something like that when it's your beach seems distressing to me. I did not like wrestling with the fact that my children were chased by dogs, walked in dog poop, and then I tried over several years to get along with people. I'm sorry that this solution seems to leave that the way it is. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening, I'm Ellen Hershey. I live in North Albany. I'm going to speak to this issue of the Park District decision to continue a very passive enforcement of their Ordinance 38, which requires that dogs be on leash. And the data shows, I think, abundantly that passive enforcement, which means posting signs which have been torn down, and having the officers only tell people verbally that dogs are supposed to be on leash, doing nothing more. The evidence, the data here shows abundantly that those methods are ineffective. On page 10, one of the reasons given for not stepping up their enforcement is that they received a minimal number of complaints about dogs there. Well, I didn't go over and complain during this EIR process because at the early information session where the Park District representative collected information from Albany residents about what we wanted at the beach, he said that the issue of dogs was completely off the table, that dogs weren't allowed at the beach. Dogs are allowed at Point Isabel. That's the place for off-leash dogs. And so this was nothing that needed to be discussed. So I thought it was a settled matter. Second thing is, on page 9, it says that the Parks District can't afford to step up their enforcement. But it also says on page 9 that currently Park District officers are patrolling the area the project site 3 or 4 times daily. And they have not issued any citations for off-leash dogs since the year 2010. They're giving verbal information only. So it seems to me 3 or 4 patrols a day, especially if there were at different unexpected times, would be plenty to enforce effectively if they actually start out handing out citations. It's what they need to do. Third, it cites budget cuts as a reason they can't step up enforcement. They did have cuts after 2008, but their 2015 projected budget shows increased operating expenditures of 5% and addition of 21 new staff, which is a small percentage. It's a big park district, but nonetheless, they're on the upswing, not the downswing. I have tried to go to that beach, relax there, sit in the sand, read a book. I pulled out a sandwich to eat. I was immediately surrounded by 3 large dogs. I told them to go away. They ignored me. I thought, well, I'll ignore them. They'll go away. And then one of them lunged for my sandwich. And you cannot go there and enjoy the beach in the normal way that people, would like to. The city of Albany went through an absolutely gut-wrenching, expensive experience to enforce the no camping ordinance. And it is wrong for the Park District to continue to neglect its stewardship, really, of that site of the beach, which should be a marvelous jewel for Albany residents and others. And the Parks and Rec Commission, you don't have jurisdiction, but I think you should take interest because it's right there. I can walk to it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hello, I'm Paul Kamen, formerly of Berkeley Waterfront Commission, and now representing Coalition for Diverse Activities on Water, Grass, and Sand. I support the plan as currently drawn, and I very much support the supplemental EIR. In fact, I think it was the first EIR that I've read cover to cover, every word. There's some wonderful terms in there, like prostrate, non-native, succulent. On the issues, again, I wish everyone would read the EIR all the way through. It's very good reading. And I'm especially impressed by the Park District's implied recognition that elements of the East Shore State Park Plan are obsolete. The process began more than a generation ago. The plan was completed, in 2002? That's 13 years ago, the better part of a generation. And the uses have evolved a lot since then. It's permanently on the map as a dog beach, and I don't think any reasonable or practical level of enforcement is ever going to change that. That said, there is a minority of park users that do need isolation from dogs, and the beach can easily accommodate this. The SEIR identifies 2 other small beaches, one of them really too small to do much of anything, but the other small beach between the abandoned pier and Fleming Point is about 1/3 the size of the main beach, and given the use demands and use patterns, long term at least, that would make an excellent site for a completely dog-free beach, so that those people who would try to have a sandwich in the middle of a dog park can be accommodated. Even so, even the way the beach is now, I very often see families with small children playing happily with, in the presence of dogs. For the vast majority of users, this is not a problem. The minority does need to be accommodated eventually. There's room to do that with good natural separation between the dog beach and the non-dog beach that I propose. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
The law frequently because I take my 65-pound, quiet, well-behaved dog off-leash to that beach. I go there because I'm old and there are too many dogs at Point Isabel. When I'm there, generally there are very few dogs, except on weekends. I'm there the middle of the day. And when there are people with children, we avoid them because the dog is too big. I don't want him frightening a child. So we go where the children are not. However, I should point out that some of the people with children come with dogs as well. And sometimes the children I'm trying to protect, I discover, are with dogs. So anyway, but I think it would be a real shame for people like me if I didn't have access. And I do try to be very polite and very careful, and I think most of the people who go there are. There are exceptions, but generally, the people I encounter there are careful and polite and careful about their dogs. So that's all I have to say.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Carol O'Keefe. I live in Albany. I'm not a dog owner. I have a cat who wants to be a dog, but he isn't. And we never go to the waterfront together. I haven't been there in quite a while because I'm one of those people who doesn't like the thought of being surprised by a dog, I'm sure wanting to be extra friendly, but it doesn't make any difference. There's a lot of people who don't go because they are uncomfortable or afraid. I do not consider that area a dog park. I will make a point of disagreeing with my friend Paul Kamen. It's not a dog park. And there are a lot of dogs there, but this meeting I know is about the supplemental EIR. And the only comment I really have about that, although I'm going to have a few other comments I'm going to slip in, is that I'm not sure I understand how the Park District has money for fencing, but doesn't have money for enforcement. And I worked for government also. Sometimes, you have money for things, but you don't have enough staff. That could be the answer. But I think that's a question that should be raised is, presumably it would have to be serious fencing to keep out people and dogs. So in my experience, serious fencing costs. And I would ask that question because the fencing, of course, will, we hope, keep out people and dogs from the area that it's immediately around, but then there's all the rest of the place. And the SEIR is talking about the incremental people and dogs. And that there being ways to mitigate to less than significant consequences from the incremental. It isn't talking about the overall population and the damage that is done. So we kind of got, you got to keep that piece straight, and the SEIR is only focused on the incremental, and I'm sure that's correct. But aside from that one question that I had, and thank you for asking about what the fence looked like, because I wondered about that also, I want to move slightly in a direction that a couple other people have said, which is I think the city of Albany should think seriously about being a good neighbor to the Park District and about being part of the solution and not part of the problem. And I'm talking about the fact that the city of Albany doesn't require dogs to be on leash at the waterfront. I know it's two separate ownerships, but it's real hard to tell where one ownership ends and the other begins. There's no boundaries, there's no markers, and I think it makes it very difficult for any enforcement if people could say, oh, I thought I could be here with my dog under voice control, not leash, which is my understanding of the way it is for Albany. And, the bottom line is if the Park District wants to be successful in offering a park that the great majority of people can actually enjoy, it needs to find a way to make sure that dogs that are there are on leash. And I would like to think that Albany, with all of its great focus on our wonderful waterfront, would like to help them do that so more people could enjoy it. The last point is that the state of California and the city of Albany have a lease agreement, and it's about 30 years old, it's still in effect, and part of the lease agreement the city signed said that if dogs are allowed on the bulb, they will be on leash. I know the bulb isn't the specific area we're talking about. But once again, it's the same thing. I've met lots of people who think the word bulb means the entire waterfront. And there's no signage that says you are now walking onto the bulb or, the neck or whatever. So I would ask you all to think for your work plan for this year. What could Albany do to be useful in this regard? Thank you.
Thank you.
My name is Steve Granholm. I'd like to echo the comments of some of the previous speakers about dogs. I personally am very comfortable with dogs, so I'm not one that worries a bit. If the dog comes running up to me, I say hello and I pat its head. But I know a lot of people don't feel that way, and especially people with small children. That's who I'm most concerned about. And I think the previous speaker made some good points about that. I think, well, I've known a lot of small children who are very afraid of dogs. I don't think their parents should have to avoid coming to the beach because of that. And I think the best way to fix that is to have dogs required to be on leash on the beach. If they're on leash, then the parents can avoid the dogs at a safe enough distance so their child isn't afraid in most cases, unless they have an extreme fear. And I think that's only fair. And I wasn't actually aware of what the district's rules were, but if the district rules say dogs have to be on leash on the beach, then Albany should be supporting that too. And I don't know exactly how the jurisdictions overlap in terms of whether city has control over that, but I would sure hope that you would be lobbying the Park District to enact that provision if you can't do it yourselves. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Mary Barnsdale. I'm one of the co-founders of the Albany Landfill Dog Owners Group, AllDog. And I just wanted to say we've been hearing for the last many years that the dogs scare everyone else away from the beach. We were delighted with the actual data in this supplemental EIR, which shows that more people come without dogs than with dogs. We see the people on the beach with children. We see mixed groups. We see a lot of diversity. The beach and the bulb draws from areas that other parts of the park don't. Oakland, Richmond, more people come there. So I wanted to make that point, that you can look at this from the negative or you can look from the positive. It's working, it's clean. We got a shout out on page 35 for keeping the beach clean ourselves. We, Albany Landfill Dog Owners Group, we're a California Coastal Commission adopter of Albany Beach. We have a cleanup on the 15th and we would love to invite you. Whole Foods is providing beverages, free parking from Golden Gate Fields, and a free sand globe workshop. It's a big community deal. It's fun, lots of kids. Please come. I'll pass this to you. Actually,
Thank you.
I'll pass it. And it's in collaboration with the East Bay Regional Park District.
Hi, everyone. My name is Denise Macco. I live in Albany on San Gabriel Avenue. I've been using the bulb and the beach area for over 15 years. I'm on my 4th dog in my canine family member, whatever. And I don't think I can recall even one incident in all these years that was negative or harmful. We had a big dog and he swam all the time and it always seemed to be just fine. People found their place. You know, if our dog seemed over rambunctious, we stayed down at the end. If there were families at this end, we would stay down at the end. I do know that dogs love food and they will grab a sandwich out of anybody's hand. That's just what they do. But all in all, we've been coming here for so long, it just would seem really strange and not right to disrupt this whole process and pull this away from Albany families. So many that have dogs and like to go there. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anybody else that wants to speak?
Hello, my name is Pam Young. I live in Berkeley, and I go to Albany Beach to go birding, and I was a member of the Christmas bird count this past year, as was I in the previous 2 years. And I'm happy to report that the Albany bulb neck Beach area in its entirety is home to over 145 species of birds. I find that these birds simply can't find refuge nearby at Point Isabel. I take my dog to Point Isabel, and that's where the birds are flushed and flee. And where do they often go? To Albany. And what happens to them there? They're flushed again by dogs that are illegally off-leash. Where do these birds go next? When I was there birding with my Christmas bird count group, we were there in the Albany Beach neck bulb area. I personally counted over 40 black turnstones, a small shorebird that traveled thousands of miles to winter here, 40 of them all being flushed by frolicking happy dogs. And the owners were clueless or didn't seem to be concerned. The Albany area is a jewel for wildlife. It's attractive to people because of its important values. To say that the impact on the landscape is negligible, I disagree with that. I think it's wrong. I think dogs are a significant impact, not just on the wildlife, but also on the landscape. After the Point Isabel restoration work was done, where new sod was planted, the Park District people will tell you that in about a year, the dogs dug new holes, and that place became a barren landscape again. If you want dogs, you need to understand the impact. If it's a passive action, that seems to me to be less than ideal. It's not planned, in other words, at least at the dog park at Point Isabel. There is a good plan in place for the impacts, for mitigation, for ongoing management, for the purpose of dogs. Albany can't be all things to all dogs and all people. It's much smaller, and any impact is much more severe and intense. The degradation will be very apparent. It would be a shame for, say, WRT to come in and do some beautiful landscaping and then all the dogs to destroy it as they will. I'm not saying dog owners are irresponsible. I love my dog. I'm not irresponsible. Dogs do these things. I urge you to consider the entire East Shore Park and take into consideration where are we protecting these important habitat values. The reason people come here for vacation is not to be surrounded by dogs in a sprawling, incidental ersatz dog park that just goes on and on because people choose to scoff at the law. They come here hoping and expecting to see the natural values intact and well-maintained. So I appreciate if you could consider how important Albany is in its distinction as a value free of free-running dogs. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Clay Larson, Albany residents. I was kind of surprised to see the proposal to fence off the 1.1 acres of dune area. There was very little description or no description of the fencing. There were no visuals. It's going to have, I assume, an aesthetic impact, which I believe the EIR should consider, and certainly people who want to comment on it should be able to consider. So I think that there should be much clearer description of the fencing. We ought to be sensitive to fences. The Park Districts has put fences around areas of the park before. I'm speaking now of the Burring Hour, which occurs to me, we could have a fence-neutral solution. We would simply remove the fencing, all or some of it from the totally ineffective Burring Hour habitat, and simply place that fencing around the dunes. We could just be a movable feast, a movable fence.
Are there any other comments? So you can think about whether or not you want to make one comment while I tell you what's going to happen. So your comments for the people that spoke, they were recorded and they will be passed on to East Bay Regional Parks. And so after we get comments from all of you, we're going to adjourn the meeting. So if you want to have your comment recorded and sent to East Bay Regional Parks, now is your time. You can also write a letter you have until, what is it, the 2nd of the 15th or?
The 11th.
The 11th of September.
Back on the table, if they're if we need more copies, I can make them. There's a sheet that has an address, a contact person. His name is Chris Barton at the Park District, with his email and mailing address and so forth. So you can send it directly to them. If you want to copy the city, that's great. That would be helpful to us. But one way or the other, that's appropriate.
No, if you've already commented, then we have your comment. But if anybody who came to the meeting who wants to comment has not made a comment, now would be your time. And since we have no more comments, I want to thank you for coming and for participating in this meeting. And it is 7:40 and the meeting is adjourned. Thank you.